I'm Peggy Deamer of the Architecture Lobby. It's my pleasure to interview two organizers from Prefab, a spatial advocacy group for collective reimagining, for resource and knowledge sharing, and for architectural experimentation in Aotearoa, New Zealand. They ask architects to imagine the future and build what's missing. I have to say, I spent part of every year in New Zealand, and I have witnessed prefab's total badass work as they put pressure on what I think, and I think they think, is a conservative and risk-averse profession here in New Zealand. So, anyway, it's a pleasure for me to be talking to you. I admire your work. So, welcome, Leonard Hobbins and Abigail Temby-Spence. Leonard is in Chile, although he's a resident of New Zealand, and Abigail is in Auckland, New Zealand, and that's actually where I am too. So I'm going to start and run through some questions, some of which are personal and some of which are organizational. So let's start. Uh, how did you each individually come to recognize that you needed to take action to change the profession, at least in New Zealand? Was there an aha moment for either or both of you? And Leonard, maybe do you want to go first with that?
Yeah, sure. There was the moment didn't happen in New Zealand. I went to the Free School of Architecture in LA in 2018, which was an experimental summer school program that happened in galleries, bars, parks, libraries, kind of all around the city. The subject of the school was nominally the fringes of architecture practice, but uh, we really just kind of talked about all the problems we were experiencing as architecture workers, like group therapy. There were participants from about 20 countries, and it struck me that architecture workers around the world share similar versions of discontent about their discipline, about their material conditions, things like exploitative labor practices, the cost of architecture education. Um, but we also found that interrogating these problems in an open, discursive way and kind of removed from the politics of the university just felt really good. And I think that feeling was a big motivator for wanting to get involved in prefab. Um, we met with the architecture lobby, the LA chapter, and yeah, so I think prefab is also directly inspired by this kind of global ecosystem of organizations for worker solidarity.
It's inspiring to hear that there was a connection early on in LA. Abigail, how about you?
Well, I was at uni when Ro Hoskins, who's a leading Māori architecture worker, introduced the class to Te Aringa design principles. And these principles are part of the local municipality's design manual, and they help architecture workers consider the project, the site, the environment, and the key relationships with people, or the key relationships people have to that land from a Māori perspective. So for people like myself who aren't Māori, and I'm not Indigenous, they're an invitation to contribute to the well-being of people, the well-being of all people in the natural world through your architectural labour. And I loved it. I knew there was more to architectural work than replicating Western forms all over the planet, regardless of where it actually was. And I knew there was more to architecture than pretending we hadn't created a nation by wrecking someone else's and building all over the top of it. What I didn't know and what I've learned is that actually, in working to support Indigenous people and histories and cultures, I feel more connected to where I live.
It's very inspiring to hear that. And I think those of us in the US are only now catching up with New Zealand's efforts to understand their total connection to and history with Indigenous cultures. So no, that's great to hear. So next question. What do you as a group believe are the main challenges to transforming the profession? How are you organizing to overcome those challenges and enact transformation? I don't know who wants to go first now. Abigail, why don't you start?
All right. Okay. So just continuing on from what you said, there's this myth among white majority settler nations that Aotearoa New Zealand is this shining example of Indigenous and non-Indigenous relationships. And the way I see it, what's more accurate is that we've become more palatable colonizers. And it's dangerous because on the surface we look great. We can give land acknowledgements and we can use sustainable practices. We can incorporate Indigenous concepts in our design work and use Indigenous names for places. But none of that matters. None of that really matters if our architectural work does not contribute to the restoration of Māori and Moriori people to their lands and culture, or thinking in terms of our wider Whananui Pacific context, to the well-being of Whananui Pacific people. Most New Zealanders don't know that the New Zealand government colonised more people in the Pacific than they did here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So we're learning to ask these hard questions about who really benefits from our projects. Us as the designers, is it actually making a change to our Indigenous people here? Whose ways of living are being enhanced by our design projects, and whose ways of living are being suppressed?
Interesting. Leonard, what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good example of maybe how there's kind of no critical discourse or any hopeful ideas about the future in mainstream understanding of architecture, and yeah, the important decisions about the built environment are made around tables that architecture workers or institutes aren't invited to, that we don't sit at. So yeah, in prefab we do want to imagine the future, and so we want to try and build what's missing for ourselves. We're not a labor organization or a political organization specifically. We're more like an organizing organization. We're made up of like discordant voices, but generally aligned, and that just lets us kind of get more work done, carry out more actions together, without being bound to a single kind of ideology or approach.
Yeah.
An analogy that we've used before is that we're like a record label, with individual artists all making work that contributes to a kind of cultural brand, and then hopefully that starts to kind of project outwards and change the culture itself. We publish in a catalog like a record label, and I think that the catalog is probably the best representation of who we are and what our vision for the future looks like, because it's this kind of
so let me just ask, because on the tail end of that, do you guys believe that our current institutions, professional, educational, cultural, and cultural includes institutions like the Venice Biennale, do you think those institutions themselves prevent the change that you envision for architecture and architecture workers?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. I think prefab's relationship with institutions up to now has been to try to fill the gaps that are left by their deterioration or their blind spots. We've collaborated with institutions when it aligned with what we wanted to do. We ran for president of the NZIA as a collective. We said that we had over 100 years of experience in the field and 20-something degrees. We weren't elected, but it was like a good opportunity to organize our own vision. But we also want to be independent, so that we can critique institutions when they don't work for us.
Yeah.
We ran a pirate architecture conference in response to the cost of the National Institute's annual conference. So yeah, as much as institutions do prevent change, we mostly just try not to think about them and focus on our own kind of initiative and ideas that we believe in.
I appreciate that. Abigail, tell me what you think.
Well, a critical question that's absent from our institution's discourse is how all of us can use our labour and knowledge to support and amplify Indigenous architecture work. So Māori and Moriori people make up 18% of our population, but only 3% of our architecture workers. That's expecting our Indigenous architectural workers to work at 6 times the rate of everyone else. And honestly, that is what it looks like. I have friends who are earning PhDs, fronting media, they're teaching, they're research, they're always expected to add some cultural flavour to architectural conferences and events. They're running their own firms, or the fresh grads are like skimmed by the larger architectural firms and pulled into these Indigenous design teams to enhance what is still essentially Western practice. And while some of this is well-meaning, a lot of it is extractive. We've persuaded Indigenous architectural workers that if they burn themselves out for our benefit, architectural work will somehow change. And it's got to stop. We need a dialogue on how all of us can use our architectural labour for Indigenous people's benefit. So here in Aotearoa and in our wider Whanganui Pacific context. Right now, that leadership is not really coming from our institutions, although I should say a lot of us in prefab are now teaching in different institutions, and our students get it. So the leading professional organizations are still entrenched very much in this Western mindset, but the students coming through from all around the world, they're getting it.
I really love hearing that. We're running out of time, but I do want to ask one for the question that maybe will be, a 2-sentence answer from both of you. But what is your advice for future architectural workers? What can they do to bring in that better future?
I would say that it's okay to want to do more than design buildings for a broken world. Like, architecture work done well is nourishing work. I feel like colonization is taking this great river that has communities and ecosystems depending on it, and it's redirected that water to a small, wealthy group of settlers. And under colonization, architecture work shelters the lives and the activities of those who extract from our planet to the cost of everyone else. So I hope future architectural workers realise how unnatural and how destructive colonisation's been, not just for Indigenous people, but for all of us. And that they use their architectural labour to help the river flow back where it's meant to go, so everyone can benefit from it. Mm-hmm. I hope as a profession we learn to be in good relation with the natural world and the Indigenous people who care for it and have cared for it long before we turned up settlers.
Leonard, what do you want to say?
I like Abby's answer, honestly. I wouldn't give any more advice. I think if we could, reorganize our society to be based around an Indigenous worldview and in harmony with the natural ecosystem, then that would be a good start, and we can think about something else after that.
Yeah, I want world makers. That's what I want from my students. I want them to see themselves as world makers, not building makers. Yeah.
I totally love it. I love talking to you. I can't wait for the next prefab meeting so I can go to it. I think you guys are doing amazing work. It's not just organizational, but it's creative and it's optimistic. So anyway, total pleasure for me to speak with you, and thank you again for taking the time. We really appreciate it.
Oh, kia ora, Peggy.
Okay, kia ora.